Squadron leaders reporting.
Admiral, this is
Blue Leader standing by.
This is Gold Leader, standing by.
This is Red Leader, standing by.
Welcome to the Star Wars Post livecast, the official livecast show of the StarWarsPost.com, your Star Wars home for news, reviews, features, and more. The StarWarsPost.com, the galaxy at your fingertips. And here is your host of the Star Wars Post livecast, Max Pallas.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Star Wars Post livecast. It's October 25th, 2018, and this is episode 20, Marvel vs. Wendig. I'm your host, Max Pallas, and tonight we'll discuss the big drama surrounding Marvel's firing of Chuck Wendig, and we'll also give our take on this week's episode of Star Wars Resistance. We have a ton to get through tonight, so with that, let's go ahead and meet this week's panel. She's a writer and contributor to the StarWarsPost.com. The amazing Liz Larson is back.
I'm so happy to be back. I've missed you guys, and I've missed chatting Star Wars with you.
No kidding. I'm so glad to have you back, Liz. And, of course, he's the owner and editor-in-chief of MandalorianWars.com, our good friend, Pete.
We'll always come back, Max. We'll always come back.
I wanted a family night tonight. I mean, it was been great having all these special...
No one's ever really gone. No one.
No one's ever really gone. It was so great having a bunch of guests the last couple of weeks, and I want to continue doing that. But I think after taking last week off, I was in Vegas last week, and just having a week off, and I wanted to get the family back together because it was just one of those rare episodes where Pete was at a Star Wars concert, and you had trouble with the hurricane coming through, Southern Virginia and just really wreaking havoc. I mean, it took a while to get everybody back. So it was nice. I wanted to get everyone together again, and cycle through. There's not a whole lot of news this week, but there was one big drama that happened. I think there's enough to talk about tonight and get through some stuff. But, of course, through that, guys, let's get some housekeeping out of the way. Like I always have this paragraph to get through, which is important. The Star Wars Post Livecast is also now a podcast on iTunes, so please take the time to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It means a lot for us and the show. And also, you can find the Star Wars Post Livecast podcast on other venues like Spotify, TuneIn, Google Play, and Stitcher. So we're on all those new venues now, and our numbers have been going up, which is actually kind of nice. I should have pushed for that earlier. And also, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel on YouTube and hit the alarm bell icon to get alerts when a new podcast airs, or new episode airs. I'm sorry. Okay, guys, so there's just a few news items. There isn't a whole lot that happened in the last couple weeks, but there, of course, there's some big drama, and we'll get to that toward the later end of the show. But I guess first in the news is up with Oscar Isaac. So Oscar Isaac recently conducted an interview with Indiewire about his life as a film star and dealing with Star Wars fan expectations. In this interview, he also gave a glimpse into the production of Star Wars Episode 9. And this was interesting that this interview came out, and I'll read exactly the excerpt from that interview that caught my eye because it kind of jives with things I've been hearing behind the scenes. So usually in this business, if you run a Star Wars fan site, we all get chummy when we talk about things that are floating around the rumors that don't necessarily get printed on paper. And even though some of this stuff is starting to get out into the wild, it was interesting to hear this one quote from Oscar Isaac that I made a special note for. So he says, "The way we've been shooting it right now is looser than it's been for the last 2 times. It does feel like a relief to get on set and feel like, oh, we can try things. It's a testament to JJ coming back and feeling confident. There's less pressure for it to be right. We just want to make a good movie and have a really good time doing it." So I think, like, after reading that, of course, it's great that everyone has good feelings on set and, like, everything's really chill. But it sort of jives with some of the things I've been hearing that there was going to be some differences in the writing. I want to be careful what I say here because there is potential scoops that other outlets could still run. And I don't want to, take away from that. But we all know that when Trevorrow left, there was a gap left open between what the script he was writing and what JJ had eventually will now be taking over because of the death of Carrie and probably some falling out between Kathleen Kennedy and him. That's the reason why Trevorrow was let go. So JJ has to write a new script for 9, which I think everybody knows this is old news, has been around for months. But I think what is interesting here is that there may be more improvisation than we've probably seen in the first 2 movies. Where in the first one, they were in a rush to get the script written. Remember, he was working with Kasdan very closely and literally doing those walks and getting everything down on paper with probably very little improv on the set day to day. Where I think this one is they maybe still be catching up and doing a lot of the writing improv as they go, which is fine. That's Star Wars. That's movie making. That's not necessarily to send alarm bells for, because I think when people start hearing that, they start flipping out, wondering, oh my, there's reshoots, there's problems. There isn't. There's time to do this movie, right? There's plenty of time to do this movie. So, and I think that's what he was hallmarking. Well, how did you guys take away from that bit?
Yeah, I also wonder. I mean, I had a couple of thoughts about it. The first one being like pretty unsurprising. Another thing that came to mind immediately for me is that they know their characters more than they did in the first one. There's a lot more improv you can do when you understand and you've done 3 films as Poe, as Rey, as Finn, and you could feel a little bit more comfortable saying, no, I think they would say this, or like giving them a little bit more reign and flexibility. And I think about the story all the time, which is that when Harrison Ford came back for Empire, and like we all know this, if you're listening to this, you know this, that he came up with the I know, right? And that never would have happened in the first one. And George Lucas didn't give him that reign because he had this specific vision for the character. So I also wonder how much of this is just creative direction that you see in TV shows and series when kind of they have more reign over their characters. And someone like Oscar Isaac, who's now worked with JJ twice, JJ now has more trust in these actors than he did before, right? Like, think about how fresh and brand new Daisy Ridley was in the first one. You would feel less comfortable giving her room to improv than you do when she's had 6 movies under her belt, right? So I wonder, like, how much of it is actually about the script and how much of it is about kind of the progression of the characters and the actors in the film. Though I do think, Max, you're totally right. It could have something to do with it. I don't know, Pete, you look like you have different thoughts.
No, I agree generally with some points both of you guys are making. Like, it's perfectly understandable that you have JJ coming into the franchise. He's done a ton of big stuff himself, but there's going to be some deferential effort when he's working with Kasdan. Kasdan is like the Star Wars writer at this point, and I'm sure he has a great deal of respect for him. So this is much more of him in the senior role in this movie, even though he was, directing and producing the last one. In terms of writing, he's got a much stronger hand in this one, I'm sure. And there's also the fact that the baton has really been passed, as you were sort of touching upon cast-wise. We're going to get probably Mark as a Force Ghost in a limited role in this movie. Sure. But this is really the next generation's movie now.
It is. I mean, I love the idea. I'm kind of happy the idea. Rian Johnson was almost like the perfect storm, right? He had time to write it, but he had a major handicap, I think. Ryan was writing The Last Jedi when The Force Awakens was filming. He didn't get a breath of who really Poe was, and other than reading the script, right? He's not looking at the dailies. He's not looking at that sort of stuff. He's writing the script. Where I think JJ, not only did he create these characters, he's got to see what Ryan has done with them, and now he's giving a lot more leeway, like Liz talked about, maybe a little bit more creative freedom for, I could see Oscar Isaac saying, I think my character would say this, right, in this particular thing, and I think that's great. But I also think that in terms of writing for the script, though, I really think, and from what I've been hearing, it's almost kind of like, almost like a daily thing. Like there's right and going back and forth to figure things out, which honestly for me, I think is a better experience than if everyone sat down, hashed it all out, and it's stuck in stone. Because I think some of the best stuff happens improv on the day, in the moment.
I agree with that, but there's also the pessimistic take, which is that JJ is incapable of completing anything well, right?
Well, no, he just never has the time.
The Lost, look at the kind of the Star Trek regression. Like, he's really, really good at setting things out and not finishing them. I don't necessarily agree with this, but there's the pessimistic take that, yes, he's less concerned about this because he's really good at starting things and not as good at finishing them. I don't think they would have let him take that over if he wasn't coming in with a really solid plan of how he wanted to see this wrap up. So I don't necessarily think that's true, but I do think he is a lot more flexible in later films and letting the structure slide. You see that in a lot of the things he's done. He's really, really good at setting up a very solid, tight script in the first one and then letting that slide as it goes. And like, people can critique Rian Johnson all they want, but like, Ryan runs a tight script ship. Like, he knows the story he wants to tell and how he's going to tell it. And like, JJ's really good at doing that at first, and then afterwards.
Well, Ryan did. Like I said, Ryan was given the best circumstance. He literally was like, "Here's your block of time. Go stay at the ranch for as long as you need, and come up with a story." And he did. And to his credit, even after the first sets were shot, he realized he had to redo the entire intro because he felt like it wasn't explaining enough. Remember, the intro was supposed to start The Last Jedi with Finn. It wasn't supposed to start with them evacuating out of the car. So that whole beginning changed with that. So, I mean, Ryan did a fabulous job writing and directing, doing everything that he needed to within a box. That's why it was perfect. It was on time, on budget. It was a beautifully executed film. With JJ, though, at this time, it's like it's almost like 2014, 2015 all over again. He's in a rush to come up with a script take some elements and treatments that he can because Trevorrow's gone, right? And we don't know how much of Trevorrow's script he's keeping. That's still an outlier out there that we don't know. And at the second point, it's even if he's got to fill in gaps or change things that he feels necessary, he hasn't had a whole lot of time to do that. Trevorrow was let go, beginning part of the summer? Somewhere around there, or early part of the year. I think it was around January.
Just be careful,
February.
because when the announcements are made is a lot different than when some of the firings happen behind the scenes.
Of course.
It's usually a couple months at least before you actually hear word of it.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's plenty of time, but it's got to be sort of, I mean, JJ would take up the challenge in heartbeat, but it's got to be kind of an amazing thing to sit back and go, oh, hey, Trevorrow's out, you're in again. Come up with a story. And it's like, wow. I mean, I'm sure the excitement's there, but talk about stress factor. I mean, that's got to be huge, especially to wrap this whole thing up.
Yeah. I keep on going back and forth on this because now I just said, like, he doesn't know how to finish things. But also, we're acting like they were like, JJ, you're in. But JJ's a busy dude, right? Like, he made time in his schedule to make this happen. It's not like he isn't producing a million shows or has a million things he wants to write, right? I feel like he came back because he knows he started these characters and he knows how he can finish it. And, like, maybe he struggles putting the end together, but I feel like maybe this is totally off. My prediction is whatever Trevorrow had, he threw out the window for what he liked in The Force Awakens. He was like, great, guess what? Now I get to come back with my Finn, my Poe, my Rey, and finish it the way I started it.
It's no different than any other creative outlet. I don't care if you're into podcasting, artworks, whatever. Everyone loves their own baby, right? And the thing is, I really do like the formula of having a director do the first and last film of a trilogy and let a completely different director do the middle hard, where the bad guys really win and things really get dire, because I think it challenges that director. In the beginning, that person's got to come up with the entire new world. But now this new guy comes in the middle to really shake up his world, which is exactly what happens in the story anyway during the second act. And it's the third act where he's got to wrap it all around. But the thing is, the continuity feels the same, the thematics, the colors, everything feels the same as the first movie, so it all wraps up nice and easy. I think.
Can I say,
sure.
Yeah, kind of off topic here, that if that's the case, I hope he does pull some major things from Ryan, like, for example, Kylo Ren. JJ put Kylo Ren out there probably because he had to, and I feel like didn't quite know what to do with him. And Ryan took that character and drove him home. Now I hope JJ says, look what you gave me. You gave me this like amazing course to to do with here. I'm going to take the Kylo Ren that you built here and slam dunk this, right? I'm throwing all sorts of metaphors here. I've had a large glass of wine, but you get what I'm saying.
I miss
so
this
basically, I hope he takes what Ryan gave him and doesn't necessarily jump back to the characters he created. Like, you had this middle thing, use it.
Yeah, and I think he's not going to be afraid to. I mean, you take with what works, and if you like it, then the audience like it. And I think that's definitely going to stay. I mean, and that's the great thing. I think having somebody come in the middle and shaking it up, maybe not to the way even you like it, but it's just like that fun game of storytelling when you get your part and you have to give it to somebody else, and you have to continue the story, and then you got to take it back again. So it just adds that element to it. Okay, guys, so that was one news item. The second one, of course, was a small one, but George Lucas made a surprise visit to the set of Star Wars and Mandalorian this week, just in time for executive producer Jon Favreau's birthday. Favreau posted a picture with the famed director captioned "Birthday Surprise" on his Instagram, which I thought was nice. I mean, George must be bored. Well, that's what I'm thinking.
This is cool because he's been low key doing this for like most of the productions. I think all of them actually. Just visiting the directors, saying hi, giving it sort of his blessing, and then moving on. Not like sort of micromanaging because he's not managing.
That's what it feels like. That's exactly.
Here's some holy water. You're blessed. He dropped off a bottle of Skywalker Vineyards wine. That was apparently the birthday present.
Take some midi-chlorians.
It's exactly what I grew up with in New York, right? Because the family, not necessarily my immediate family, but my aunts and uncles were very diehard Catholics, and of course the priest would come by. The Catholic priest would come by and bless the house and like do their little thing to whip off the spirits that's exactly what that kind of feels like. It's like these guys show up. George is here. This has my blessing. I like this. You can do this.
I also wonder how much it is for the director and the cast to remember what they are doing, right? Like how much of it is like, I'm sure he's going, but also how much of it is Kathy trying to get him in there and say like, hey, look, remember where we came from, right? Like this is like George's vision. As much as you try to run with it, it's a bigger machine than you. So like, I also think it's probably pretty strategic on her part, because especially directors who can get like a little, I know, egocentric and like very stuck on their vision, to bring the creator in there and be like, whatever you created, he did it first, right? So like, keep it in check.
Can you imagine if like you were coaching the Green Bay Packers and like all of a sudden like Vince Lombardi walks in and says, "Go get him today, boys"? Wouldn't you just like run out of that tunnel and?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy. I mean, for me, it's like I really wonder how this starts. Does George call Lucas? I'm like, oh yeah, I want to stop by the set if that's okay. Where is it? You know, or is it one of those things where the PR people are like, "Got to get George. He's scheduled to go," and it almost kind of like, you know, when I worked at Costco as a manager when I was in college, like 50 million years ago, like the CEO at the time, I think it was Joe Senegal. He would go, of course, they would do this warehouse. They go to every single warehouse tour. And you'd think after seeing like 200 warehouses, the guy would get bored, but no, he'd sit there with this whole entourage of buyers and whatever else. And we have our entourage, and he would go up and down the aisle. And I mean, this guy was like bent over looking at every little product. And then he would stop like mid aisle and look at a can of tuna fish and be like, "That's not a value. Get it off the shelf," you know? And I'm kind of, is like George just kind of sitting back going, "Yeah, that's kind of nice. I like what you did there." Or is he kind of like, you know, throwing pointers? Me, honestly, like if I'm Jon Favreau, I would tell like George, you can hang out here every damn day. I don't care. You know what I mean? You could sit behind me, throw out your stuff. Like, because he's executive producing the thing. Of course, there'll be different directors, but I think like, especially because it's close to home, it's probably not that far away. Have George hang out. I still want to see George get a piece of the pie here. I want him to do something. Like, I would love to see him direct an episode.
Ever.
I know.
I wish.
You know, everybody says no. And Jason would go back and forth to this on the old podcast on Making Star Wars. And he's like, never, never, never. I'm like, why not? Why couldn't he do an episode of The Mandalorian? Why is that so hard of a stretch? Kathy would say yes to that in a heartbeat. There's no way Kathy Kennedy would ever go, no. Like, it's not happening. You know? And I think I would love to see an episode where he just comes up with, I think once he gets into the show, I would not be surprised. I mean, I would be surprised if it happened. But at the same point, I wouldn't be. Because it's your baby. You know what I mean? Doing a movie's a big deal. But doing an episode of a show?
No, he has no interest in any of that criticism anymore. Like, now he shows up and we're like, "Oh, cute George. He's so great. We miss him." Right? But like, I'm sorry, Reagan is going nuts. He has no interest in being a part of kind of the machine anymore. I think the involvement he has is perfect for him. And I think he will continue to show up on the sets because we like it, right? But like the second he has zero interest in the criticism anymore. He has no interest in that. He had it through the prequels. He had it kind of in Return of the Jedi, right? Like, he has no interest in it. So as much as he could be like the good Uncle George who shows up and is like, "Great, I bless you, have fun," and we all cheer, he's going to keep on doing it. But no, I don't think we will ever. Do you know what I will here, Max? I will give you this. He will contribute a story that he does not write, direct, produce, anything. He will throw out some ideas of characters or settings or planets or even like an arc. And he will say, "Dave Filoni, go with this." There will be some sort of cred. There will be a bunch of press around it. He won't actually do anything. He will spew out some bull, and we will eat it all up, and that'll be it. You know, that's all he's going to do.
He's sitting at the bottle of like Cabernet Sauvignon one night, and he drunk dials Filoni. Is, "Hey, I got an idea. Yes."
Exactly. No, but honestly, it's like, but that's the beauty of this show. It's that it is a great sandbox for young directors, for new directors, for even him to come in. And you know what? It's not like anybody ever looks like an episode of Game of Thrones or some other major miniseries and goes, "Man, you know, that one episode really sucked. Who's the director of that thing? Let's completely lambast their career." It doesn't happen in a TV medium. It only happens in movies. Like, very few times, like, you would get somebody who would notice an episode and not realize that somebody else wrote it. You know what I mean? I mean, if there ever is an avenue for him to come back in a very small project, it would be here. It would never be a film or like an animation series. I think this kind of fits to him to do an episode or two. Of course, it's a long shot, but do I think it could happen? Would I like to see it happen? Oh, hell yeah. I would love to see him do it. I think it would be great. Okay, so that was easy enough. So So, guys, the next story that came up, of course, is on a sad note that John Williams, the famed composer John Williams of a sprightly 86 years old, is currently hospitalized due to illness. The remaining planned concerts he had in London and Vienna have been canceled. We here at the Post, of course, have the maestro in our prayers and for speedy recovery. He's getting up there. Everyone kind of has this on their radar to a certain extent, but I love the way that Star Wars Twitter has not really talked about it. We just don't want to jinx anything. We want to wish him our greatest recovery and hope that he comes out okay. Yeah, like I'm going to keep everything upbeat. I don't want to go down that road because he is just way too important in my life as a composer. I think for numerous films outside of even Star Wars and if in generally. I mean, the music is probably the biggest reason I love movies, and him is the number one composer I've ever had. So yeah, hopefully speedy recovery. I'm sure you guys have the same wishes. I'm sure. Okay, guys. So the last story, of course, was one that broke today. An interesting one. The Hollywood Reporter broke a story this afternoon that police are investigating a theft from the Manhattan Beach set of Star Wars: The Mandalorian. The grand theft was called around 11 a.m. this morning. Authorities were unable to confirm what was taken in the theft. However, one ragtag outfit is claiming that expensive film cameras and, more importantly, their memory cards may have been stolen. The outlet was The Blast. They came out first early this afternoon. It's a rag I don't like. They actually took one of my tweets like 3 weeks ago and ran it as an exclusive. So they're a pop shop. No one really knows who they are. And they wrote out this story that there was a theft, which they got first. The Hollywood Reporter came out about an hour and a half, 2 hours later with their story, saying that very expensive video cameras were taken, but more importantly, the memory cards inside of them may have also been taken as well, which means they could have footage on them and compromise, the story for Star Wars: The Mandalorian. I'm kind of siding with the Hollywood Reporter on this story, that they still don't know exactly, the police don't know exactly what was stolen. They're still trying to figure things out. It seems odd to me that the Lucasfilm would lock very expensive equipment, and especially stuff that hasn't been scrubbed, either in a shipping container. Because remember, this set on, at least that we think from near Manhattan Beach, or whatever they call this beach, that's nearby that train railroad yard that Jason's been living at the last 3 weeks, I would really doubt they would lock up that kind of stuff in some sort of shipping container. I mean, for anybody in the middle of the night to go take, especially without any security there. Like, I have a hard time believing that. What do you guys think?
It's not clear based on the story. The one thing, I'm no expert in cinematography. I can't talk tonight, apparently. But my understanding is that it's basically hard drives that go into those cameras, not like little memory cards like would be at your camera at home, because you're dealing with a lot more data. And so that little fact in the story sort of makes me think, I think you might not have got the whole story.
They're still SSDs, but they're not that big. But at least the housing for them, are good size because they have to hold a lot of data. So it's almost like a tape drive that you would pull out, but it's actually built of SSDs, but multiple SSDs within an arrangement. So, but it's still big. It's not something you would leave in the camera. And I think you take them for dailies. This stuff's got to be taken for post processing.
And my reading of the story was, I may be completely wrong, was it was more of in a studio setting, not out on an exterior lot.
Yeah, and that has to be, we still don't know because
so it's not clear.
When we look at the address, it says, we know the only filming so far that we know about has been happening along this yard, along that location. I guess I guess I'm going to reach out to Jason, at least get some confirmation of, is this the same place that they're talking about? I think it is, because even the Hollywood Reporter sort of detailed to that point as well, that they talked about that particular set that we've been seeing. It could, if it's behind closed door set, an actual studio lot. And I think that was mentioned too, that they were filming scenes there for Avatar, the new Avatar movie as well. So maybe it is a production set that this happened on. But the stealing of any cameras in Hollywood usually gets to be on the front page. I mean, when one studio is losing cameras and somebody steals them, that goes back to old Hollywood, when studios would literally steal cameras from other studios to film movies when they needed them in short-term things and put them back. So, it was just interesting to read something like that. If somebody did get those cards and there is data that's not been scrubbed, I wouldn't recommend putting those images or any kind of thing online, because you're going to find yourself in a real world of hurt very, very, very fast. I would not recommend that. So, interesting story, kind of out of nowhere, but if we see something that comes forward, we might know. Okay, guys, so the big news in the last 2 weeks was unfortunate again. Again, drama has sort of reared its head again in the Star Wars fandom, and it all ties in, I think, politically, what's going on in the nation right now. And of course, the story, this show and the site, we've always tried to keep away from politics as often as we can. And the reason for this is because we always wanted this to be an outlet of escapism, which is what Star Wars kind of should be in a certain extent. But, things get so hot and heavy in the country that eventually it's going to spill over to everything, and it's inevitable. It's just the way it works. And, of course, there's going to be disagreement, I think, on this show between me and Pete. Pete and I have been very vocal on Twitter because we're good arguers. We like to argue and make good points and go back and forth, and it's healthy that we do that. But, of course, the big story was the 3 times New York Times bestselling author Chuck Wendig took to Twitter October 12th detailing his firing from the comics division of Marvel. The reason being generally uncivil in his approach to Twitter. Chuck went ahead out of nowhere in early part of that Friday, it was 2 Fridays ago, announcing, because he just recently came off the announcement at the recent New York Comic Con that he would be doing Shadow of Vader, a small mini comic series for Marvel, and that things were looking up that he was going to start doing more stuff for Star Wars. He tweeted, and then the announcement for Star Wars Shadow of Vader just last weekend, and people were excited, and I thought everything was good. I was not made aware of any issues, and my online self has always been my online self. So, except, no, today I got the call, I'm fired, because of the negativity and vulgarity that my tweets bring. Seriously, that's what Mark, the editor, said. It was too much politics, too much vulgarity, too much negativity on my part. So, I guess just disclaimer, I'm a huge fan of Chuck Wendig. Always happened since 2015, since he wrote his first words on Aftermath. I've loved following his Twitter feed. I think he's hilarious. I get his comedy. I get his prose, right? You get a kindred spirit sometimes with some writers that you just gravitate to. Chuck is that for me. And since having this sort of relationship with Chuck, meeting him in person, especially at my San Diego Comic-Con years ago, and seeing exactly what happened along his Star Wars career since the beginning. And I think backstory for this is important. Before Chuck ever even came out with the first Aftermath, especially the night before, there was a concerted campaign by, again, a small percentage of individuals from the Expanded Universe group. At that time, I called them the Expanded Universe Sandinistas, because these guys were really, for such a small group, they were so prolific and everywhere in those early days of 2015. They would show up on podcast live streams like at Star Wars Underworld. You would catch them there, hijacking those threads. We were hearing stories of these guys at conventions, bullying people from the Del Rey panel in person, outside of the panels, in hallways, like really just making a scene and making people feel uncomfortable, almost like with a physical presence, like they were going to get beat up for what they did to Star Wars by, establishing the new canon and getting rid of the Expanded Universe stories that, people have enjoyed over the last 20 years. The concerted campaign they did get at Chuck, especially the night before his release on Amazon for Aftermath, where there were hundreds of negative reviews on Amazon for his book before it ever even went live. And I was there for that. I wrote that. I was several pieces on that point, where the good thing is these morons didn't realize that the way the algorithm works in Amazon is that regardless how many stars you give a title, the more reviews it gets, the more it gets shown up on the top of search results for people to buy. It's not so much if you like it or not, but if it's getting traffic and awareness and comments, it flies to the top of the scene. Did Chuck lose sales because of it? Perhaps. He still had a gangbuster outlet for the book. The book debuted on the New York Times bestseller list. I enjoyed it. There was a lot of people who didn't, mainly because of his writing style. And soon after that, besides this group, they really made a concerted effort to crap on anything that he did afterwards. Online, they were very vicious. They were very, the guy got death threats. And he really talked about that later and after these tweets that afternoon about discussing how bad they gotten. And I think historical perspective here is what matters. Because I'm trying to put myself in Chuck's shoes, and I'm trying to put myself in the audience recently who got upset with his latest tweets. I'm trying to put myself in both places to get their perspective. Because for me writing about it, I have to be fair. And knowing what happened with him earlier with the Aftermath series, and then progressively getting worse. And then what happened was, after the Expanded Universe guys got their bid in, of course, we all saw what happened with The Last Jedi. When the movie was released, there was this whole new wave of characters that came out to slam Rian Johnson, Kathy Kennedy, and to assist and sort of how morph this whole social justice warrior. Disney's trying to change people's minds by putting lesbian and gay characters in the stories, and they're forcing it down our throats. And we saw that whole, again, but it's very small percentage, but very loud, ugly crowd now partnering with these expanding universe Sandinistas. And of course, it was a daily thing on Twitter, whether it be for Ryan Johnson, Chuck Wendig, Kathy Kennedy. It's the cast of characters, right? It's never Mark Hamill or Oscar Isaac. It's always these 3 or 4 people that these guys have targeted, which started this whole new YouTube campaign, which has really sparked over the last 6 months from guys like Ethan Van Sciver and Geeks and Gamers, and a lot of these guys out there, because this is about money. The more they could slam these guys, the more money they can make. And I have been, when I've written about this in features for the Post recently, I have been watching these guys' YouTube channels and their live streams and talk about how, I mean, this is so black and white for anybody sitting on the outside. You pick a bad guy, you go after him every day, you get your followers to harass them online, and you make money. Not by only clicks. The real money, especially when you watch Skyver and his group, is when you look at the live feed. They have the live donate button to his Patreon, and you see every single 5 seconds, $5 donation, $10 donation, $20 donation. It's crazy. Like, I mean, as a YouTuber myself now, I guess with this channel, seeing the amount of money, and I mean, I really put a lot of effort into hearing these guys, and trust me, it's not easy to sit down and listen for 2 hours to hear these guys spew about how much they hate The Last Jedi and Kathy Kennedy wanting to launch her from a catapult and all this other stuff. I mean, really nasty stuff. And that's the stuff we hear about. And to see the money that they make, and when people say it's not about the money, it's always about the money. And Chuck has always been on their radar. And then, of course, we went through that whole spit with RFR, where Chuck, who is a liberal Democrat, he voices his opinions very, very, very clearly on Twitter. He goes after conservatives, especially elected conservatives, and generally some of these asshats who really go out of their way to make life miserable for everyone. Now, I'm talking about a very small percentage of people. I'm not talking about all conservatives, because that's completely wrong too, right? Pete is a perfect example. He's sitting right next to me, virtually, and Pete's not that guy, right? Pete's never that guy. And it's just crazy to see this. So I can see where Chuck is coming from. So if Chuck has an off day, and he has a couple tweets that offend people, I can get that. But does this editor at Marvel, and this is an interesting story because, and I was talking to Pete, of course, before the show, we haven't heard any official response from Marvel Lucasfilm yet. It's been 2 weeks. This story is national news. This is well beyond the fandom and our kitty site and all that other stuff. It was on Vox today as a feature story. I mean, this is, of course, surprising Chuck, seeing his face on Vox, and they never even contacted him. So, you know, I definitely want to get your guys' opinions, and I know Pete's going to have a completely different opinion of mine. And I get where he's coming from, too. But I guess we'll circle back to that. So, Pete, what's your whole thing on this whole bit? Your both sides take, if you could find both sides take.
It's tough because it's not, my take isn't tough, but I want to make sure I'm explaining it clearly so I don't confuse you guys or anybody that's listening at home.
Sure.
I'm a fairly big fan of Chuck's online presence. I started following him before he was even attached to any Star Wars projects based on other authors I followed, and he started popping up in my feed that way. And I have no problem with folks that have different political views than myself. I have lived in 3 states before my current state, Vermont, Massachusetts, and California. And I have always been had a minority viewpoint to the people around me in terms of politics. I mean, you know, going to college, our campus Republican club had 10 people, I think, and the campus socialists had like 100. So It's like, I have no problem with that. And I also just, one of the things that initially bothered me, I don't particularly care for his writing style. I think he's a very good storyteller, and I think he's actually very good at character. But the mechanical aspect of the writing, getting the story and the characters onto paper, I think he has some serious flaws with.
Sure. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of people who don't like his writing.
And I think there was a lot, not just by Chuck, but I think a lot of people that were fans of Chuck at the time that Aftermath, the first one, came out, that objected to the writing style.
Yeah.
There was a lot of, you just don't like it because he has these gay characters or he acts like this on Twitter. There was some of that, but I think that's how a lot of the people that were saying, wait, we just don't really like how he wrote this book. Came out.
I didn't like the book, and I'm all about gay characters.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
I wanted to. And not even I wanted to like it. I straight up didn't like it.
Yeah.
Straight up didn't like it. And I told you that, Max, when we met at Celebration.
Sure.
One of the first things we were talking about was books. And I was like, I can't. I went there the night I was so excited. I went there the night I could to buy it. And I didn't like it. Just wanted to throw that
I got it before it came out. Yeah, but to continue on Pete's point, because I want Pete to get his thing up. But Pete,
go ahead. I want to point out as a EU fan that I have some of my collection, but I donate over 200 of my EU books to the Children's Hospital, the Ronald McDonald House out in San Diego before we moved. Yeah. Because I love those books, but there were characters that people would have called SJW characters in the EU. Karen Travis introduced gay Mandalorians.
Sure.
And they were great. There was a great characters, great story, whatever. Doesn't bother me at all. But the stuff with Chuck is, I think, something that we've seen just across the culture, and I try to catch myself on even, that in the past 2 years, we've seen a radicalization in online behavior of people, especially folks that are engaged politically.
Sure.
And there's a rhetorical boil that we've seen. And, I'm not going to go through everything, but there is one tweet as part of a thread he sent out. I'm going to bleep out parts of it, but he said...
go ahead. Just do the tweets. Well, perfectly okay.
It's from October 6th. He said, "Winter is coming, you callous F-necks, you prolapsed a-holes, you grotesque monsters, you racist, rapist, wretched abusers, you vengeful petty horrors." Now, I just want to say that, okay, I can let that slide, but
sure.
What that's saying to me is someone that votes conservative, even though I left the Republican Party when Trump was elected, just to be out there on Front Street. That means that I feel reading that Chuck hates me. He does not want me to read his book because he hates everything that I believe in because I simply disagree with him politically. And I don't see any other way to read that. Now,
and that's okay.
I don't go out there protesting him. I've said that I think there should be public comment from Marvel and Del Rey about this because he released some comments that he said were told to him behind the scenes. Sure. So I think there should be an official comment to deal with it. But I don't think that is anywhere within the realm of reasonable public behavior for someone that's a contract employee or a contractor for a major publication when they're doing licensed work. It's not like this is his own work. He's got like his own book series he's doing. This is licensed work for a big corporation, Disney. And there is some kind of behavior that I think is acceptable in the public discourse. And I think that's crossing the line. I mean, we just saw Megyn Kelly getting basically fired for some really bad comments that she probably didn't realize how they were sounding when she was saying them. But there's a way you have to behave in public when you're in this kind of high profile position.
There is. And
I wouldn't have fired him, but I can understand perfectly why the editor would say, "Listen, man, you went too far this time. We got to let you go."
Go ahead, Liz.
Well, I was going to say the thing that gets me for that, and like obviously I'm coming from one, I would not compare him with like Megyn Kelly's statements. I feel for a lot of reasons, but and his position to Megyn Kelly's position seems crazy, right? Like that's not a fair comparison in terms of their position and their audience. And like we feel like the Star Wars audience is everything, but you cannot compare the Star Wars audience to the post Today Show audience. But anyway, so off that track for a second. My thing with it, and I've talked about this many times before, I am a very politically active person. I choose not to be.
I think we all three are.
Yeah, I choose not to be politically active on social media for various reasons. One, because I invest that energy that I feel into different activist routes. I spent the last 3 years working at a job where I felt like I was fulfilling different social justice causes that I cared about a lot. So I integrate that in my life into ways that it does not manifest in my social media context. Anyway, the thing that gets me about this, and one of the major things that I have, is that he was hired within the period that he was already active in this realm. To me, the big kicker is if you, and we see this with James Gunn, we've seen this with other things, if you do not want people doing that, do not hire those people from the get-go, right? Like that to me is the biggest kicker, because you're totally right, Pete. Like he has been active on social media and doing these things, and I have been following him for years. And yes, they have escalated recently, but 2015, they were already pretty bad, right? Like 2015, 2016, they were already escalating, like Trump's election, right? Like they were already pretty bad. if Marvel knew they did not want him to be doing these things, they should have backed off beforehand instead of firing him.
Yeah, I mean, this was a recent
thing too. Like, to me, the thing is that they are doing it in response to something and instead of their own moral value, which is a difference to me. If to me it is them of their own moral conscience saying, we're not okay with this. This is not a behavior that is acceptable to us. We want some accountability within our organization. That is one thing. If it is, this is a response, we knew he already did this and didn't care, but now that you're saying it's bad, maybe we care. That to me is the difference. And so to me, if you have a standard and somebody crosses the line of that standard and you want to fire them, fine. If you don't have a standard and you're basing your standard off of kind of general aggression levels of Twitter, maybe you should reevaluate that. To me, what I hope Marvel's doing is I hope this process provoked Marvel to think about their mission and values and how the writers portray themselves publicly hold up to those mission and values. I personally do not think that conversation is happening. Otherwise, they would have said something. So,
sorry to interrupt. I don't mean to.
Okay.
I was just going to say that I think, you're right. I don't necessarily disagree with much of what you're saying. I would say that Gunn's comments were much further in the past, the stuff that he got fired over.
Totally right about that.
And that there has been a leadership change both at the top of Marvel with Bukowski coming in and then the Star Wars editors changing. And I don't know how long ago the deal for this book would have happened. I don't know what the timeline is, the stuff behind the scenes. But it's possible that the leadership change did affect it in some way.
But if you're a leadership coming in this climate, and I know that I've had to deal with this, and I'm sure you guys have too, when you change a boss or when you change something else, that like when somebody comes in that's new, they set an expectation, and then if you break that expectation, that's not cool, right? To me, I don't know, maybe Chuck Wendig is lying and he's already, when this new editors came in or when he was hired, he was given a platform about this. But at least the story that he's portraying and that we are hearing is that is not the case, right? It is not that somebody came in and said, look, you were doing this before, not cool now. Or like, look, these are the standards we have. If you do this, it's not going to be acceptable. It was that they are responding to kind of this aggressive fan base online, regardless of whether or not his tweets are okay, which I think is debatable. I'm totally okay with being debated
for me,
on whether or not his tweets are okay. And I don't know how I feel about some of them, right? Like that is not personally the way that I choose to engage online. I like to have empathy and I like to have real conversations.
Sure.
And so to me, some of his tweets, even for me, are debatable. That's not to me the bigger problem.
I think everyone is super hypersensitive already. I mean, the nation is that way. So everyone gets sort of a free pass, a little, in my book, to say, you know what? Everyone get a little bit thicker skin. It's going to get a lot hotter. Like, we're not even there yet. We still got a long ways to go, I think, as a nation before this whole thing sort of resolves and things go back to, I hate to say, back to the old normal. But in terms of Chuck, the biggest thing that matters to me most about this whole thing is the fact that it seemed to come out of nowhere. And the thing is, a decision like this could have been handled by the organization completely quietly. It could have been, hey, Chuck, here's a slap on the wrist. Stop doing what you're doing. We're giving you a warning. Continue on. I mean, just one tweet that honestly never really got traction. I don't even think on the far right took it and went nuts. Because when I say the far right, when I refer to Skyver's group, these guys, any kind of ammunition that they can find, they want to grab because it helps them to make their shows and to make money. So any sentence that Ryan Johnson says, anything that these guys say, they're going to take and run and create this huge, they're going to ratchet it up, this faux outrage to make the maximum amount of money possible. This is what politics is. This is what politics has always been. You take what something says, you make a big deal about it to get awareness to make money. That's what it's always been. And with these guys, they, especially in the last 5 months, they have found a conveyor system of money. And Chuck fell into it. He messed up. And that tweet, it's a bit much. And he gave these guys the ammunition that they need. And that's his fault. But the question remains, completely sitting outside of the story and being objective to report this as a story, is here's this editor at Marvel who, at least on the outside of it, looks like he did it on his own. I don't think Lucasfilm was really brought into it. I don't think Disney was brought into it. It's almost sort of like he made a decision himself because we haven't received any official word from Lucasfilm or anything else. And there's a lot of people at Lucasfilm who like Chuck. And Chuck had mentioned also that Del Rey is squarely in his corner because, in their opinion, to a certain extent, and I think people get a little bit of a leeway in social media, every individual on Earth has to be careful on how they behave themselves on social media because it could affect your job outlook in the future. It can affect your current job outlook now, to a point. But people are allowed to express their political views in any way they see fit without worrying about getting fired.
Well,
I also think
I don't think
we
that's
need to
true though,
be-
Max.
But
No.
I think you could look in Hollywood and say that there's a lot of people that if they express their real political views,
yeah, of course.
they wouldn't get a job because it's so far left out there
Exactly.
that there's a lot more self-censorship on the right
Sure.
than there is on the left.
So the question
I
is,
also
should
think,
that
like-
happen? So the question I have for PP, it's not necessarily, is it allowed to happen or not? The question is, should it happen? Roseanne Barr being a recent case,
Yeah.
right?
Now
Roseanne went
there's-
off the deep end with her thing again, right? The Nazi stuff and all that other stuff.
Well-
Should she have gotten fired? And it's a legitimate question because it's funny for me that I'm a diehard liberal. I have been contributing and like doing stuff for the Democratic Party my whole damn life since I was 13. Honestly, my first gig at 13 years old was sweeping the floor at Dukakis headquarters at Fairfax here in Virginia, right? I've been into politics. We're a very political family. We volunteer and do a lot of stuff. But I also grew up in the age of Howard Stern, shock radio, and that sort of, it's almost like in the 70s as well, that people make pop shots, they do digs, they say stupid things that are racist and everything else. And of course, people should be held to it. They should be this. But for me, there's a small part of me that's just like, okay, when you affect someone's ability to put food on the table, when you're affecting their livelihood, I'm not saying that Roseanne didn't deserve every damn lick she got, and I still think she should have been fired. That's my personal opinion. But at least at that moment is to take a pause and to really breathe and go, okay, are we going to do an organized campaign online to go after this guy to get him fired? And what's really interesting for me, and I'm waiting more on this story, is Rebel Force Radio made a really big campaign concerted effort about 6 months ago to try to get Chuck in trouble with Marvel specifically. Right? Why is Marvel allowing to? Because that time Chuck was doing some work for Marvel. Chuck was making comments. RFR created this whole wind campaign of why should contracted employees for Lucasfilm be making fun of fans, saying that, calling them names and doing stuff. And of course, that landed flat on its face, and Lucasfilm did nothing, and Chuck went on doing his merry stuff. Why all of a sudden this happened out of nowhere? Did this editor make this choice up himself? Or did he seriously pick up the phone and call Kathy and, they work things out? But if that was the case, I think Chuck would have found out, not from Marvel, he would have found out from Lucasfilm. You know what I mean? About his behavior and what Disney's expected of him. There's something here that's not right.
I want to back up to one thing you said, Max, just to disagree with it there, which is that, and I did a little bit with the James Gunn thing, so I apologize for this, and I've said this before in the show, context is everything. And comparing Chuck's comments to James Gunn's comments to Roseanne's comments, and I hate the slippery slope
oceans. Yeah.
I hate slippery slope arguments. Like, if we start firing this person, we'll start firing everybody, because that's not true. Context is key. And what you do, the audience you have, how much power you have, what kind of comments you make.
Sure.
To me personally, all those things should be factored in a reasonable decision of how we address something. And I don't think there's one right way to address something. I think for every instance, for every organization, for every incident, it should go back to your organization's mission, principles, and values. Sure. And that based on those, you should be able to evaluate the context and make a decision. So while we keep on throwing all these people in the same buckets,
they're not the same buckets.
I want to clarify that they're not.
They're not the same buckets.
Yeah, and that it's easy to compare something that happened to something else that happened.
Oh,
just
sure.
The way our brain works.
It gets whitewashed like crazy.
Yeah, and I feel like that's the problem a lot of times in the political arguments we make, is we say, well, that is like that. But it's not.
It's the false equivalency nightmare. And I can't stand it when I hear it too. And the good thing is, us three here, I could talk all night with this with Pete. And Pete knows what A is A and B is B. There's no bullshitting Pete. And one of the great things about this with the Wendig story is Pete does make a valuable point that one tweet. Now, I look at a tweet and I don't get offended by it. But Pete does. And if he's honest about that, and I believe he is, because I know Pete's an honest guy. If people were felt hurt by it, it would have been nice, at least to the point that Chuck would have issued an apology, which he sort of did, and is a retro after he got fired. But it would have been nice for Chuck to say, you know what? If I caused pain for people who are fans, who do look like my work, but just felt kind of disassociated from me, I kind of went too far. I'm sorry. And I think that goes a long way. And I think for Pete, that would have been perfectly fine. Am I right, Pete? If he would have apologized in a sincere way, you wouldn't have asked for the guy to kicked off Vader or anything else. Exactly.
Even without the apology, I wouldn't ask to get him fired. My whole thing was I think it would have been appropriate for both him, Marvel, and I think it would have been appropriate for him to apologize, and Marvel and Star Wars and Disney, whatever, to release a statement saying, listen, we support the freedom of speech. We don't necessarily agree with what he said.
Sure.
But we support our artists being themselves in social media. We would just ask them to show some respect to people that may disagree with them. Something like that. It's not, I don't think it's, I wouldn't expect that much.
What I think you're getting at here, and I did a lot of work last year on community accountability. I did like a long story, but I did a lot of work on community accountability. And one of the things that I used to say a lot to people was, when there is a problem, when a member of our organization, a member of a group, a member of something we're a part of messes up and does something that we don't agree with or does something that's wrong, we have an instinct as a society to either push them out and say they're wrong, we don't ever want to engage with them again, or we bring them closer and we say, no, everything's fine, don't look over here. And like, what does actually that medium ground look like? And to me, the biggest problem is that Marvel didn't engage with that, right? Like, you did not solve the problem by firing him on any account.
You made things worse.
If it was wrong, if you thought it was wrong, you didn't fix it. And if you thought it was fine, you didn't fix it. Like, to me, the biggest thing is, what do you actually do in that middle ground? And obviously there are sometimes, again, context is everything, where that is not appropriate. But I'm talking about kind of general, inappropriate comments for the most part that don't actively harm people. Like, what does that conversation actually look like? Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like that's what you're getting at there. Like, what actually happens? My
whole thing is with that is like, I'm not so concerned about his policy positions or his viewpoints. It's the way he expressed them targeted at people or groups of people.
Yeah.
And that I think that communication is where it's breaking down here. I don't think they're doing a good enough job sort of expressing why this may be problematic for the brand, because a lot of what these companies have to remember is the long-term health of the brand. And if you are just letting this stuff either go like wide open like it has been, or if you're reacting in a reactionary way to bad elements that may be acting from outside, purposely trying to create controversy, I don't think either of those approaches are healthy in the community management.
I really hope Lucasfilm, not because every organization has to do this. Federal government has to do this. And the thing is, nothing is a one-fit situation for all points in time. You have to pivot as an organization. If you're in PR and social media after The Last Jedi is starting to become a very toxic place where creators are starting to get attacked, where people are very upset, there's people attacking people who are upset with the movie, who generally don't like it and are calling them names, right? Let's say all sides of the spectrum. You have to, as an organization, I think, as Lucasfilm, should sit back and go, okay, guys, we need to have a game plan just to talk with everyone, just to have a chat, to say, how should we, in this current frame set of where the country is, how everything's going online, how should we proceed with creators and how they should behave to a certain extent? And just talk with them. And the thing is, there's nothing wrong with going to someone, Chuck, and say, hey, guys, to keep everything on the low, we're trying to ask everyone, try to stay away from confronting with fans, blah, blah, blah. If the creators don't like it, they could always leave. Right? That's just the matter of it. But as an organization, Pete's right. To a certain extent, I'm not saying policy.
Yeah.
I'm saying awareness. And there's a difference there.
I don't even think it has to be laying low, right? I think you just have to have a stance on it, right? Like, it has to be, to me, it doesn't necessarily have to be laying low. It could be, our mission and values of Star Wars is that we want people to be able to express all their different opinions, right? Or as, they could even take a political stance if they want to. That's their right. Saying, like,
absolutely.
We want to be liberal, conservative, X or Y, right? Like, I think the biggest problem right now is not having a stance, I think, in a lot of places, and then trying to make those very hard decisions and having that communication without some sort of moral backing to come back to. Yeah. And I used to do this all the time, again, in my old job.
No, exactly.
When thinking about kind of, I used to work with athletic teams a lot, and it was hard for them to make decisions without coming back to kind of their moral backing of what does our organization stand for? What does our team stand for? What are the things we want to express? And right now, I feel like if Lucasfilm is smart, if Marvel is smart, they're using this as an opportunity to not have this happen again, right? Regardless of what the outcome is, regardless of whether you feel like he should have been fired or not, I feel like even the people who thought he should have been fired think the way, maybe I'm projecting here, but I can imagine, even if I thought he would have been fired, the way he was fired was wrong, right? Like,
well, it gave fuel for these guys, and that's the thing.
Think he should be fired. I'm going to put that out
exactly,
there.
Well, because this is where it comes down to, because it all comes down to what you said, Liz, about timing. And the thing is, when you have Skyver and these guys for the last 4 or 5 months, very recently, including Arfar, going after Chuck, and then Chuck slips up with this one tweet, right? It gives them ammunition to the point he gets fired. Now, these guys, the day that he got fired, I jumped on their live streams to see how these guys were partying it up with confetti and party poppers. And the money they were making, again, donation after donation after donation. And Pete's right. Pete was a little bit concerned that maybe we're conflating two different things. But I think it literally lives in both houses. There's regular folks like Pete who feel alienated by a creator that they like, and they just want him to kind of take it easy or apologize. And then there's an active group that goes after these guys night and day to try to get them fired to make money. It's a little bit of both. And the thing is, Chuck sort of gave an apology after what happened. We still haven't got anything official from Lucasfilm or Marvel. It emboldens this other group to do more. And by Marvel doing this decision, which I think on their own, and not really thinking it through for the long term, saying there's a ton of ways we could deal with this with Chuck. We could talk with him behind the scenes. We could say this is the last gig that he's doing for for Marvel. There's a bunch of different ways of scalping this problem if they think it is a problem, without it being in the public domain and feeding this group.
Or firing him with a statement, right? Like,
exactly.
How easy wouldn't it have been for them to submit,
Here it is.
Release a statement, even to Chuck and say, we're going to talk about how we're parting here.
Yeah.
We should be open about this.
And that's why I think this was done ad hoc. I really don't think this was brought in with Disney and Lucasfilm in the mix. And because he's an outside contractor. And it's easy to do that if you're Marvel.
We've seen Lucasfilm get rid of people. We saw them get rid of Trank right before the convention when he was announced on a panel. I mean, we've seen them get rid of people.
He was passed out on the floor.
Yeah, and we've seen them get rid of other people, and they've still managed it better than this one.
Oh yeah, exactly. And I think this one really caught him off in left field. But I think we're all right in our points. I know that sounds weird and just easy, but it's true. I think we all have valid points. We all kind of sit in the same area. And the thing that bothers me the most about this is now that you fuel these guys and they got Chuck, they think they have Chuck off their list. They're just going to find somebody else. And they're going to make them the boogeyman, and they're going to go after them night and day.
Well, I've said this to you before, Max, that I'm not tangentially, I'm very involved in the Star Wars community, but not as vocal. And I don't have thousands of Twitter followers or even hundreds of Twitter followers.
Oh, you will.
But I've said to you before that I'm scared to. I don't have a ton of interest in it. And especially as I've seen look at what happened with Ash, look at what's happened with other people in the Star Wars, especially women in the Star Wars community, that if I and you're snickering people, it is so
I'm laughing because I understand, because I had people coming after me in different ways. So I totally understand.
I don't it is a scary thing to be really engaged in that. And I was actually saying this to someone tonight when I was talking about it. And I was like, I love this. I love doing it. I really, really empathize for people who are attacked on Twitter. And I don't have any interest in being part of that. Not that I think anyone has any interest in being a part of that, right? But in the way that it has limited my interactions with people on Twitter that I think I would be a lot more vocal about, I don't have any interest in being a part of that. So I don't know. I don't know why I'm going off on the tangent. To say that it is a thing that actively brings me here.
Ever since I started running, especially for someone like me, right? I'm a cybersecurity SME, and I work at very sensitive places. And for me, I had to think long and hard about how my presence, especially when you start to have young children, on how that's going to look online. And I am going to kind of toot my horn. It takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of chutzpah, and it takes a lot of care, and you have to be very careful about what you say, what you do, and the type of person you are. And I think the beauty of living in this town most of my life in DC is I have a lot of friends who are completely on the opposite side of the spectrum politically from me, as being a liberal Democrat who's volunteered and being a huge part of the process because I love the process. I love politics. Always have. Mom sat me down watching the Iran-Contra hearings, one of the first memories I can remember. Right? It's just the type of family we were. Come from immigrant parents who believed in politics, especially my grandmother who was an American. Right? Classic picture of John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King on her wall that I don't forget. And the thing is this, I have always been able to enjoy the company of conservatives on far right spectrum, who names it. I'm glad to have a Brandy, at a bar with them, it's one of the greatest joys of my life and some of the friends that I have, because if you can't sit and have a discussion with people who disagree with you, you are losing out on two very important aspects of life. And I see this in a lot of millennials that just like to shut people out. Like, I don't believe in what you believe in, just you're out of my life. I have no time for you. You are missing two important lessons. One, you have to learn how to engage with people who think differently. It helps you focus your conversation. It helps you focus your ideas, and it helps you deliver those ideas to try to convince people the way you believe things should be done. You can't change minds with a baseball bat. You have to listen, you have to learn, and you have to be able to talk with them. And then the second most important thing is you're missing out on half the people in the world. You can't shut everybody out. Pete is like, for example, it's like Pete and I are completely different opposites of the spectrum, and we go back and forth on Twitter. But it is a joy to have Pete in my life. It's a joy to talk politics with Pete in my life and to talk Star Wars. Because even though we disagree politically, Pete is a smart guy. He's got smart ideas and he cares. And it's the same thing for me. I know Pete feels the same way I do. Mm-hmm. And I think in Star Wars, of course, it goes back to the same thing. You have people who dislike the Last Jedi, but of course they're Star Wars fans and they're just complaining about they just didn't like it. They're not haters, they're not whatever, but then there's a group who are purposely organized to go off the deep end that cause the biggest ruckus, that cause the biggest pain, that everyone's dealing with. My only concern moving forward is 3 with this Chuck Wendig story. And this is what I wrote in my feature. That I hope future authors do not get shy about including gay and lesbian characters in their novels because they just don't want to deal with these super far-right guys who are nuts, right? Like, we're not going to see these characters disappear because they just don't want to deal with the drama. It has not to do with they don't believe in it. They just don't want to deal with the drama in their professional careers. The second thing I worry about is that they're going to pick people all the time and keep this conveyor running. It's going to be like Andy at Lucasfilm. It's going to be Chuck. It's going to be Rian Johnson. It's going to be other people who show up within the fandom, even the organization, or the creators that actually create this stuff that they're just going to pick and just browbeat to make money. And then the third thing I worry about, and it's a slow burning worry, is that in this environment, all it takes is one kid who's had a bad life and who's just messed up and he's really crazy to act on this shit, to go to Celebration and to do something stupid. Rian Johnson coming out and signing autographs like he did last time for 4 or 5 hours, that's not going to happen anymore. I don't want to see Rian Johnson come out there and do it anymore because I would worry about him constantly, right? A Celebration is contracted security. I need to make sure these guys are really checking bags. Like, it's no joke. I mean, I've worked at Department of Homeland Security for 7 years with the guys this is the business that they do. And let me tell you something, when I went to San Diego Comic-Con, a Celebration, I was scared to death to see all those people outside waiting in line all night long. It's just a catastrophe waiting to happen. And the last thing we need is one kid, because that's all it takes is one guy, one girl to lose their shit and to really hurt people. And it's like, you know what I mean? And the hypes of I'm saving Star Wars. Because Skyver and his group, when you keep pushing this hate day in and day out, somebody inevitably, and we saw it this week, of course, with the bombing, somebody inevitably snaps and they lose it. And that's the worry that I have. It's a slow burning fuse I have that I'm worried about now because I really don't want to make this a thing, right? Especially on Twitter or in a featured piece for the Post. But I worry about this shit because I really think this could be very dangerous.
I want to go back and I agree with like 99% of what you said there. I want to go back to one thing about like the sitting across from somebody and having a drink and millennials can't do that, blah, blah, blah. I personally feel I can do that. And yes, I feel like that's important. And I really feel it's important. The one thing that I feel where the breakdown happens sometimes, and I'm just going to throw this out there because I did see this a lot. I saw this a lot. This happened when people had conversations about Rose. I did see it in Star Wars, which is why I think it's important to bring it back up, that you and Pete sitting down, I'm just using you and Pete, it doesn't have to be you and Pete. You and Pete sitting down and having a conversation around a scotch or a beer, you guys have more things in common than you don't. You're around the same age. You are white men. You may have more other similar experiences. Whereas I feel like when a lot of these things happen, especially where the breakdown happens and where I feel like it's justified sometimes, is when abstract political opinions become about people's lives in a way that they aren't being recognized, right? Like, I don't agree in gay rights standing across from a LGBTQ person, or saying I don't believe in gay marriage standing across from the LGBTQ person who's married.
Of course.
That on one side, it's an abstract political belief sometimes, and on the other side, it is someone's life experience. And so I feel like I saw this a lot with Rose, where people were going after Rose online and saying racist things, and then Asian American people or minorities or whatever, or even women were saying, no, this is my life experience. So I feel that exacerbates this. I feel like we have to figure out a way to get through that. I feel like being able to have a conversation with somebody is still important, but I wanted to point that out there that it is
totally. And let me clarify this just real quick.
I know you meant that.
Yeah, exactly. Hate speech, with some lunatic is like all gay people should die. That's a lunatic I don't expect anybody to engage with, right? Like that person is so far out that that's not even talking about that. And I'm not talking about those spectrum of people. Those are people that are just clearly, there is almost no hope getting to them, especially if they behave that way outward in public, right? There's obviously, and no one is saying that that is ever okay, or even should be engaged with, even like, oh, you can still be open-minded. No, there is a fine line there. And I think it's important to make that distinction. And let me do one more caveat to this. As a person who's not a millennial, I'm not completely white brushing, like with a broad brush, all millennials. But what I find interesting is, and what I love about millennials, because I am going to do white brush of this, it's the first generation that I've seen either studying in history or today that we're not up for your bullshit generation. Where countless generations, if you follow politics, like from Generation X going back, there's bullshit on both sides. You go with the flow. It's the way politics is. I love this new generation because it's just like, we're not taking anybody's bullshit anymore. You lying, it's a lie. We're not up for that bullshit anymore. And I think that's an interesting dynamic that I love. Because my youngest brother, Alex, is a millennial. And Alex is a huge libertarian, which is enough to drive both you guys crazy. And what's really great about it is that I just love to see people be open. And I think the best way that I've ever handled myself on Twitter was, one, I'm lucky with the feed I got. And two, first of all, just not insulting anybody. And if the people who go crazy, it's just mute them. It's not even, a good thing is I rarely had to mute or ban ever anybody because I'm lucky. My feed just happens to be lucky. But more importantly, and this is the last point I'll make, is that I'm a good guy. And one of the biggest problems with good guys are...
You say so.
But this is interesting though, because someone made this point to me.
Tell me how good you are.
No, but I read this point a couple months ago, and I never looked at it from that perspective for representation. That good guys, especially with the hearings for Kavanaugh hearings that just recently came up, good guys have a hard time believing bad guys could be that way. Where girls see other stuff, go, guys are assholes like this all the time. But good guys can't believe it, that bad guys would act that way. And so we're actually part of the problem because we're not listening to say, no, some guys could be real jerks. And in this case, some racists could be real jerks and stuff like that. And
I got into an argument with somebody that, recently because they were like, but he's a dad, he has kids. And I was like, he can still be an asshole.
Exactly.
I don't know what you're kidding about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to close on a couple thoughts real quick. Is one of the big things that, I'm not quite as old as Max, but I'm pretty close, and I'm a lot older than Liz. Unfortunately, I wish I was younger. I'm falling apart.
You wish you were younger.
But the big thing is empathy, and it's not always easy. It's not always comfortable, and I'll be the first one to say I don't always succeed at maintaining empathy in situations that I should. And it's something you constantly have to be aware of when you're engaging with folks. And the other thing I would say, this might be a little more out there, is that we talk about different classifications of people and how that might affect their experiences and what they know. But don't assume because someone might not be part of a certain group that they have had the same experiences as someone else.
Oh yeah, totally.
That's a big thing, because I may be standard issue white guy, but you don't know where I grew up. You don't know what I went through as a life.
Sure.
And we all have our challenges, and that's one of the things, going back to empathy, when you're interacting online. If you got crossed a line, it's better to apologize
always
than to stick to your ground. It's better to think that the person that you're dealing with might be having a bad day or might be having their worst day, because you never know. And a lot of times you don't even know who you're interacting with sometimes. So when you can, if you're called out on it, think about what you've done, maybe apologize if you can, and just
I apologize for everything. It's the,
Biggest mistake is
honestly,
saying-
it's the biggest lesson you could ever learn in life
Yeah.
is apologize quickly, apologize dramatically, especially if you're married. You get away with everything. Like even
I
at
apologize
work.
too much, to be honest.
Yeah,
But
you should.
the
It's a good thing
thing-
to be. It's not a bad thing. It's actually, trust me, it's a positive trait.
The other thing I was going to say, Pete, to your point, it's something that we used to say in my old job a lot that I think you would appreciate a lot. And we used to like use it as like an underlying philosophy in a lot of things. And we used to say, OPAR, other people are real. Because if people treated the person in front of them as if they were as real of a person as they are, which we don't do.
I
We
know.
act like we're the center of our own universe. And like, so many times when I interact with people, I think about it constantly, and I have to remind myself constantly that the person in front of me is having as real thoughts, as real feelings, as real emotions as I am, regardless of their life experience, where they're from, whatever else, right? And treating that person as if they are exactly like me in real personness. And if we could do that, communication would be so much easier. But it's a lot about empathy, right?
Yeah, and it's just, it is.
It's so hard. And I feel like it is like you say you work on it. I feel like I work on it. I'm sure, Max, you feel like you work on it. It's not like anyone is perfect at it at all. It's something we have to constantly be reminding ourselves. And it's hard when the person in front of you isn't doing that, right? Or like isn't in that moment doing that. But like, how can you make yourself do that?
It's so easy to have empathy for the 95% of people out there. It's the 5% of bad actors. And I'm just throwing random percentages out. But it's important. And that's why, as I hate to say, cost an organization for the Post, but when I write a feature about Skyver and his group, it's because I think they're a real danger. And that has to be addressed. And people might can quantify, oh, Max, you're just going off the deep end. No, I think, and that's my position as an editor, to say what should people be talking about in Star Wars. It's not just regurgitating the news and coming up with speculations and spoilers. When I think there's something that is detrimental, not just for the fandom, but for people, I feel like an objecting as an amateur writer to write about it. And I think Skyver and his group, because it's about money, it's not these guys are on a band trade because they want to, take their spears and their catapults, like they said, and get rid of Kennedy. It's about them making money, which is way more devious than anything else, because it's a conveyor that'll have a never end. It'll never end. But as long as it keeps making money, they're not going to stop, and it breeds more people doing it. And when you have a platform like YouTube and you can do that, I mean, this show might get maybe 100 views this week. Skyver will throw up an instant live stream, just berating the same regurgitating points against Ryan Johnson and Chuck Wendig. The guy will make up like $1,000 in donations. Right? Why would
I think
you stop?
instead they should donate to my wine habit. I'm just going to put that out there.
No kidding,
Much
right?
better use of your money. Check out this
Yes.
YouTube channel. This is a great show. Throw me some bucks for some wine. Just gonna.
Yeah.
It'll make the show more fun. I'm just gonna say that.
But see, the funny thing is for me is we've already got a template for this. In the year run up to The Last Jedi, we saw Star Wars YouTube completely change with speculation videos, right? As soon as these guys realize they can throw up all this bullshit about what their fake sources, they can make all this money. And if the movie comes out as something like they say, it doesn't matter because these people will still watch them. Like guys like Mike Zero. So this happened with people for just speculation. What happens now when these guys took that exact same model and now they apply it to hate speech, to constantly go after people to try to get them fired so they can just ramp up this constant thing, this whole momentum. And they found likely allies with the expanded universe folks, right? And then the far, far right are people who don't want gay and lesbian characters in that very small, loud percentage of people too. It's like they found necessary partners to say, hey, we're with you, to kind of get together. And then what ends up happening is you get this sort of money-making conveyor. And what Marvel did was embolden them. These guys were super happy this past couple weeks. Their videos have been nonstop, and they've been making money saying, say, look, follow me, I can get things done. Acting like they were the ones responsible, when in fact it was just Chuck who really slipped up with this one guy, apparently, who made up his mind. Right? And that, to me, I think it leaves a position of, but you know what? I'll write about it. We'll talk about it. And it's my job to make sure it gets in the forefront, to understand what it is, because I like calling it faux outrage, because that's what it is. It's faux outrage for money. But there are people who are upset about it, like Pete, which isn't faux outrage. But for Skyver and his group, which I think is the danger here, they're the ones we have to worry about, because they're the ones that are constantly hitting Marvel, right? Guys like Pete. Pete's not taking time out of his day to try to get Chuck fired. He's upset about what Chuck wrote, but he's not trying to get him fired. Those guys are, because that makes them money. Right? because they had a big loss. They thought Kathleen Kennedy was going to get fired. She didn't. And they still made money. He still went up, did his live stream, talking about how wrong he was, and people are still giving him money. It's insane. It is absolutely patently insane. But people love to hate watch, and they'll pay for it. And that's the truth. It's the ugly truth. Okay, with that, let's go to Star Wars Resistance. What a great segue, right? You know, let's drive this one right off the cliff. Like how I can do a zero thing. Sorry for getting so deep, but you know, I love the fact that we've had this our 20th episode, and we should have had more since we started this whole gig. But it's great that we can have topics like this, and I'm not afraid to shy away from them. I'm not shy away to have people talk about them. And even I had to talk with people before them, like, be yourself, speak your mind. It's okay. It's okay. Because you don't fix problems. You don't get people's perspective unless you get a chance to talk. And if you're muting everybody and deleting everybody, you're not going to get that. Right? At least from an honest person who can kind of give you a perspective that maybe you don't see. Okay. So Star Wars Resistance. Which, you know, honestly, for the last 3 or 4 weeks, it's been kind of tough because they showed up with 3 new episodes right out of the gate that you were able to watch on Disney Go. And I think everyone loved it. We all enjoyed it. But now we're waiting every week with an episode we already have, right? It would be great to go diving into the episode and talking about it. I think one of the biggest things, of course, we've all gave our opinions about how much we like the new series. We think it's great for kids. It's not going to be for everybody. The art is great for some, not so great for others. We all generally like it. We think it's a great idea. It definitely should stay. And I think Fuel for the Fire, which, of course, was this week's episode, which had Kaz looking at all the racers and what they were doing, and honestly having some pretty funny hijinks when his engine that he's working on for his ship is falling off the side of the Colossus into the water, which cracked me up. I mean, with the kids. Gabby, I think, laughed for a good, solid 2 minutes. It was a fun episode. I think we're after 3 episodes in, and we'll have to give it a few more. I don't think it's a show we're probably going to talk about a lot on this live cast. Rebels was so deep and thick with pros and things that we could talk about and where it can go. For this show, the plots are very simplistic. They're lessons for children, and it's almost like the A-Team, right? Could you really have a podcast about an A-Team episode? No, not really. Right? It's the same thing. Bad guys show up, there somewhere. You shoot them, you flip a van, good guys win, right? There really isn't a whole lot of things, but hopefully that might change. I mean, there might be new nuggets that come up that we can talk about, reveals, things of that nature. But as a course of matter, I think other podcasts are doing the same thing. It's going to be a hard show, I think, to do for adults to talk about on a podcast. I'm tempted to probably get Gabby on the show one night and on a side video and just have her give her opinion because she's 6 years old and she's smart and she could do that, right? And just get her opinion on it. But I think that's something separate I'll do. If you guys, listening, watching, if you guys want us to talk Star Wars Resistance, let me know. Like, send an email over to livecast at starwarspost.com, and maybe we'll do more. Pete, maybe, or if you guys, because I don't know, are you enthusiastic about watching this series, Lynn, or no? Lynn, I call Lynn. Why is Lynn in my head? You know what? That's twice tonight. That's twice tonight because I'm thinking of the marketing director or the marketing executive manager at Lucasfilm. Lynn has been on my head and I have no idea why. Yes, go ahead, Liz.
So upsetting. I'm away for 2 weeks and he forgets my name. So I watched the first episodes. Yeah. I thought it was good. I thought it was cute. I thought it was fun. I am currently right now insanely busy. I was saying this earlier. And to me, it is not worth, as an adult who is very busy right now, finding the time to watch the show. At the end of the season, when all the episodes are out, maybe over Christmas break, I'll sit down and watch them all. For me, it's not really worth it. It's fun. If you have kids, watch it. It's great. I will give some recommendations if you would like something worth watching. You can watch Avatar: The Last Airbender. I'm going to make Max watch it. It's unbelievable.
All right, I'll put it on my list.
The best animated show ever made.
Now, is this a new series or has this been out for a while? I mean, I've heard Avatar.
So, it came out 15 years ago, I think.
So you want me to watch the original Avatar series that was out 15 years ago, and it's on Netflix now, the whole catalog?
Amazon Prime.
All right, I have that too. I'm good. Okay.
Yes, watch it all on Amazon Prime. It is the best show out there. And the creators who did that just made a show called The Dragon Prince. Gotcha. It is not as good, and it only has about 8 episodes out now, but it's on Netflix. And that is also an unbelievable show for parents and kids to watch together, and for parents to understand the lore, the mythology, the lessons, and for kids to enjoy the show. So if you would like 2 shows that are not so kid-centric, watch those instead.
I've been watching The Deuce on HBO, which is a complete 180 from anything. The Deuce has been heavy. No, but hey, I grew up in Jamaica, Queens, New York. I grew up in Jamaica, Queens, New York in the late 70s. So looking The Deuce is like all kinds of like feelings coming back of gritty, dirty. You all have no idea how dirty like where I grew up and how life was in some major cities in this country in the late 70s. I mean, it's just crazy. But no, I mean, there is so much good TV. The Haunting of Hill House, I think that's the name of the title, has been fantastic on Netflix, and we talked about that earlier. You know, I love it because it seems like October and Halloween this year is a thing. Every year
Sabrina comes out tonight. If anybody's going to watch that,
it just seems like it goes by every year so fast and nobody cares. But this year people care about Halloween, and so do I. I mean, I actually changed the theme on my cell phone for the last 2 weeks with a Halloween theme. I never do that.
I just want to throw, as long as we're talking about TV, I'll add that addition to Avatar: The Last Airbender, there's another series, Korra, Legend of Korra.
I love Korra so much.
Which follows, it's a sequel series to the Avatar series, it's shorter, but it's a good series, I think. There's only 2 seasons, right?
There's 4 seasons.
There's 4 seasons? Oh, okay.
But they're shorter.
They're shorter, yeah. And then, I'm going to put my plug in just because I love genre entertainment. If you aren't watching The Gifted, which is the X-Men adjacent series on Fox right now, it's really good.
That's good, too.
Yeah.
I've been watching Hilda with Gabby. Hilda's like this new animation show on Netflix. I think it's from a British outfit. It's brilliant. And the art style. You know, the great thing is there's so much great TV. I can't wait when The Mandalorian... I mean, dude, can you guys imagine when The Mandalorian goes on and we're getting like live action Star Wars? That's going to be insane.
We'll have to do just straight up recap podcast of that too.
Pete's going to be insufferable. Yeah. We know what we have to figure out. We have to figure out how we can live cast watching that show without getting in trouble.
Can I live cast like this, Max?
You can live cast, buddy. You can live cast anywhere you want to live cast. I totally hear you, loud and clear. See, I honestly, I would love to do a live cast where we can watch the show live without breaking copyrights or anything like that, because I'm sure Lucasfilm wouldn't like that. But no, I mean, it's going to be a great time coming up with. I miss having Rebels week. It's like I need my weekly dose of Star Wars. And Resistance is nice. I watch it with the kids. I think it's great. It's a great project. Let's not get rid of it for years. But it just, for me as an adult talking on the show, I don't think there's going to be enough depth for us to really get into everything. I think there'd be some things that get highlighted and get mixed up, but I think it almost fits the same level as the books, where we can review a book that comes out that's a big deal. The comics, when the Chuck Wendig thing came out, I made an official declaration for the Post that we weren't going to talk, review, or do anything with Marvel until the situation was resolved in some way. Honestly, what I'm waiting on is an official response. Like, what happened? Why? And then we'll make a choice if we're going to continue it. And of course, this lands right when the new Vader comic is coming out. And it's just fantastic this week because I'm reading it everywhere else, right? With the reviews and everything about Vader and how the castle's built, with this former Sith Lord. And it's like, I want to dive in after reading the whole series this year from Charles Soules? Forget the writer's name, which has been marvelous. The Vader series comic for me this past year and a half has been amazing. It's the best part of Star Wars for me, and I'm missing out on it now because I'm trying to stick to my guns. But we'll see how long I can take. Hey, if I could be on the keto diet for 4 weeks, I can go without Marvel comics for a little while. Right? No sugar trumps comic books. But no, the show's been great. Guys, it's been a great night tonight. We went to 11 o'clock tonight. We actually did a good long run show. I'm hoping, of course, to continue to have more guests from all over the Star Wars fandom and Star Wars Twitter. It was a blast being with the family again, especially with you, Pete and Barbara. I'm kidding, Liz. I should do that actually for the show notes. Join Max, Pete, and Barbara.
Stunt walk off stage right now. Seriously.
Girl number 1.
She's like, I'm gone for 2 weeks and you're ready. Don't remember my name. But that's funny. Okay, guys. So we had a great show tonight. Everyone, please just don't forget to follow us over here on the Star Wars Post at StarWarsPost.com, and also on the channel here. Don't forget to subscribe and rate our podcast on iTunes, and don't forget you can catch us on Stitcher and all those wonderful places that are out there from iTunes, Google Play, and such, which would be fantastic. Okay, everybody, have a great night, and we'll see you again next week.
We hope hope you enjoyed another episode of the Star Wars Post Livecast. Please subscribe, rate, and review our livecast on YouTube, Facebook, and iTunes. And don't forget to get all your Star Wars news, reviews, features, and more at thestarwarspost.com. The galaxy at your fingertips. Good night, and may the Force be with you.